Just 70 years after the proclamation of the final empire, Lizardfolk society has rapidly transformed itself into the #1 power on Halan. The other, quote, civilized races have come to terms with our intellectual and military prowess, and the trolls have been sent to the deepest corners of the Shadow Swamp. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the other powers of Halan, we've been able to reactivate our Zatsaria and establish our first colony on a different planet. This is the third part of our Lizardfolk playthrough as the final empire. Will it be the last part? I honestly have no idea. We do have quite a bit to get through for that to be the case, so we might as well get started. Firstly, we do need to have a larger fleet than Kalsitosovk. Unfortunately, they have 232 ships, so by the time I'm done building up to 232, I'm sure they will be at 250. If you remember the laser moths from the last part on Romutha, our new space colony, they're like regular moths but absolutely massive, and as the name suggests, are able to fire lasers. Now, some of our scientists think maybe if we bring a cocoon back to our colony in Romutha, maybe we can tame the moths. This, of course, couldn't possibly go wrong. Surprisingly, it didn't take very long at all for us to build the necessary ships. Naval force limit is, of course, merely a suggestion, as it does not cost very much to go over it. The 300th Empire was a naval-based empire. Its capital was located on the island with the Arskits spire. That would be the one over here. The very same spire that is now half submerged in the sea. It wasn't that long ago that it stood proud on that island, entirely above sea level. But the island was sunk in the wake by the Deep Devils during the onslaught, when creatures from the deep rose up to attack coastal settlements not just across Tanayas, but as far north as the Dragon Coast in Canor and into the Divenhal. It's funny, they actually mention those very same Deep Devils in the tree for the kobolds. So if you play Kobold Zan, you'll also see a reference to them. Ever since the Arskits Empire collapsed, many lizard folk have not dared sail out further than Favanosi. So many islands once inhabited by lizard folk were left for ruin in this time. We can't let this fear of the deep ocean rule our senses. We are the final empire. We will rule the islands once again. For 100 years, we get the legacy of Arskits, giving us an additional colonist and 50 global settler increase. We also gain a couple of permaclaims, and in 5 years, we will get an event. Since we have maximum faith in the prophecy, we just get 100 of each power point. I do tend to preempt a few missions, so here we also have the Thraxi patterns. The Thraxis is the highest and most important of all the Arizari. It has accompanied the lizard folk ever since the Second Empire, when it helped their civilization recover from the ruin of the First Empire. Its importance is best exemplified by its presence on our flag, representing eternity. Yet, the last time anyone spoke with or heard from the Thraxis was thousands of years ago, during the 318th Empire. And all it did then was bless a local Chokin ranch. Some scholars of the 333 empires theorize that the Thraxis was killed during the Green Blight, a terrible period when dragons and draconic creatures roamed the Tanayas. The truth to the matter lies in the stars. The Thraxis is not one being, but a collection of smaller Thraxi, a Arizari made of stars. Thraxi appear and disappear according to the patterns of these stars. Each tribe typically associated themselves with one star pattern and, by extension, one Thraxi. If we can learn how to track the stars, we can track the Thraxi, and eventually summon the Thraxis itself. The only problem is looking at the stars for too long can cause issues. So we get the Thraxis Observatory in 3 different provinces until the end of the game. Each of them have additional unrest but get 25% additional trade value and reduce our technology cost by 1% each. In 5 years, we're also going to get another event. Now, as it mentions, staring at the sky for too long can cause issues, and I'm not too sure exactly what the lore behind that is, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the dwarves up here as well. If you play Krakdoom Vroor, I've heard there's something to do with that as well. But from the context clues we have, it appears that the stars are perhaps not really stars, or at the very least, Whenever you look at the stars, there's some force that compels you to look away, maybe, I don't know, but we have a touch of cosmic horror going on, and I kinda like it. With our new claims, we do have to reclaim the Summer Isle, which, okay, they're not completely devoid of lizard folk. In fact, we have the lizard port here. That's pretty cool. But I'm sure that mission's gonna mention something about the number whatever empire that had a capital here. It seems to be a theme. More problems with the prophecy. If only this had fired before I increased our trust and it only gave me a few points. Turns out some of our record keeping sucks, and so when we find new documents detailing an empire that was maybe or maybe not previously counted, but you know, it turns out it was told from a different perspective and it actually was just talking about a previous empire, not a new one. Normally this wouldn't be a problem. However, it would kind of ruin the foundation of everything we've been building, so we have to pretend that that isn't real. Even if every piece of evidence points to our miscounting, we can never, ever accept it. But we will lose some faith in the prophecy. Next up, we're going to start a really big war to take all of the stuff in this area. Ooh, interesting. Okay. So in Lizardfolk society, typically, the smallest of the eggs, the runt eggs, are not allowed to hatch. Only if you were very wealthy would you keep the smallest of the litter. But since we are a wealthy nation now, and one with a dire need for new lizard folk, for us to populate our new planets, we can send those runt eggs to the colonies and allow them to thrive away from their larger siblings here on Halan. This gives Romithus Space Colony Manpower 1, and presumably, if we had other space colonies, it would actually be in effect for all of them. So that kind of answers the question I had at the end of the last part, which was, how are you going to make sure that these can scale the way that normal colonies do? Because they only own one province. And the answer, it seems, is event trickery. Right, we do have two big events now. Let's start with this one. TLDR, our skits lies underwater. The Deep Devils were responsible for that. Then the merfolk arrived and settled the area. So, are the merfolk Deep Devils? Probably not. Instead, we have a different theory. The merfolk are Ruinborn. Cue the dramatic audience gasp. How could this possibly be? Well, the merfolk do bear general elf-like appearances, including distinctive pointed ears, and considering the discovery of Ruinborn elves and how mutated they are from what elves would normally look like, there is a possibility. It's a very controversial idea, especially in merfolk society, but a couple of the Ruinborn ancestry believers want us to help them return to Elantir and uncover the truth. So, of course, we will do our best to assist them. If we or a subject control provinces in Elantir in 5 years, we will gain new merfolk settlements in Elantir. Before Anzelkatsa, the primary lizard folk faith was a mixture of worship of the Arizari and belief in the creator gods. Both Arizari and the gods were symbolized in the stars. The proof of this was that attempting to discern the movements of the stars would afflict not just the observer but everyone in their village with a sort of sickness. Across Halan, this is known as astral terror, a madness that occurs whenever one studies the night sky for too long. In our hubris, we believed the final empire would be immune to this ailment, that we could examine the movements of the constellations and summon the Thraxis back to Tarias to tell it of our accomplishments. This was not the case. The observatories in Katalaraz and Odu Karas have been destroyed, torn down by their own occupants, driven mad by the skies, speaking of something that was watching them back. Not the Thraxis, though, something else. Something always out of your field of view. Something watching us. Yet that did not occur to those at the island observatory. Instead of gazing through a telescope, they looked at the sea itself, using its reflection to gaze at the stars. The idea that this would solve the astral terror was mocked. After all, telescopes too use reflections, as they are simply a series of lenses and mirrors. Perhaps it was not the reflections that saved us, but the Arizari in the water. Whatever the reason, it must be studied further. For true breakthroughs have been made following the movement of the stars, the patterns of the Thraxi, and the possible method by which we can summon the Thraxis. The Arizari of Eternity meets the Eternal Empire. We are so close. So we have two of our mountain observatories that are no longer observatories. Of course, they were burned down, so they get 25 devastation and lose 3 development each. Then Karshir gets the Thraxis laboratory until the end of the game, giving it minus 50% dev cost, flat 5 trade value, and minus 5% tech cost. Of course, we also increase our faith in the prophecy. But the funny thing about this is that I was planning to finish this mission ahead of time, and so I ended up developing this to 30 because I thought it said I needed to develop one of the observatories instead of just whatever it needs, the laboratory, I think. And coincidentally, it just happens to be the one that was the cheapest to develop. Anyway, we do need to cast any kind of scrying spell, it says. So we can go ahead and just scry on our internal dissidents. Why not? It is a little expensive, but that's fine. I'll just debase a little bit of currency to fix that. After all, we have way too much development anyway. Our truce with Yezelmora is up, and it's time for us to finally reclaim our spire. And now that it's true frost, the 12th month of the year, we can seemingly summon the Thraxis. There is a very narrow band of time when the stars are in alignment that this summoning ritual will work. As a gradient is in retrograde as the Thraxi are active, the right conditions have been reached such that we can call to the stars and bring it down. The being upon our flag, the most senior of all Arisari, the one that has looked over our kind from the Second Empire onwards. It's time to summon the Thraxis. I should have said that in more of a game show kind of vibe. Summon that Thraxis. Anyway, as the lights in the night sky lined up to the markings in the sand, each constellation glowed and began to fall, as though the sky itself was falling. Thraxi, each made up of thousands of stars, sank from the heavens. As each one reached the ground, it would join its brethren and spin together, faster and faster as each Thraxi joined the throng. More and more lights joined its ranks, the center of the whirring mass shining as bright as the sun itself. And then, with one brilliant flash of light, it stopped over the crowd, the symbol of eternity, the Thraxis. At first, many fell to their knees, the Naga in attendance curled up in awe. Yet, as the minutes wore on, an awkward silence descended over the crowd. Could the Thraxis speak? In records it had spoken, but this thing had no mouth. It was doing nothing but hover there. With a searing look from the head Naga, the Emperor shuffled to his feet and stood before the Thraxis. He started to speak, to the most resplendent of beings. He was cut off by a voice that resembled a million voices all speaking at once. Hello, dear. How nice of us to see you. It has been time since we last spoke to one like yourself. Tell us, what is it you wish to know? The voice was simultaneously comforting and terrifying, like a million unspeakable terrors tucking you into bed. The Emperor stuttered and stammered, realizing he was not prepared for this. What can you tell us? How old are you? The Thraxis swirled in place for almost a full minute before it finally responded. We are older than time. We were here before you, before dragons, before genies, before the skies and the seas and the land and all beyond. Your question is difficult for us to answer, as to have an age we must have a birth date in time. That is something we do not possess. The Thraxis spun in place for another minute before speaking again. We enjoyed this visit very much. Do feel free to contact us again if you have more questions. We will be... Right at that moment, light from the sun spilled out over the jungle and onto the beach where the crowd stood. In that light, each star of the Thraxis faded, and before anyone knew what was going on, it was gone. They seem to like us, at least. Every 10 years, the Thraxis will return, where you can ask it a new question about the mysteries of the world. Interesting. This has me grinning ear to ear because it has a lot of similarities, sort of in some sense, to another book series I read a little while ago. The series is called Children of Time, and instead of a Lizardfolk civilization, it is a spider civilization that is sort of gaining aid and having its questions answered instead by a human researcher. There's a lot of backstory in that. Anyway, good book series. We have finished off another mission though. Basically, the halflings are actually kind of chill. They're the only other species that have kind of respected us, at least a little bit historically. Even so, we Lizardfolk used to rule these islands, and so it feels a little weird for Lizardfolk to have to follow the rules of the halflings. So what we're going to do is take a bunch of the fronts of the clutches of eggs, and I guess in addition to sending them to the colonies, we're also going to send them to the islands. It'll help raise our population in the area, and they'll be right at home as they will be about the size of the halflings. So Taramzadai becomes a new Itaizembe headquarters, giving us 200 governing capacity. That's quite nice. It's also going to convert much of the area to Itaizembe Lizardfolk. We get a couple of permit claims, and every province in the Favanozi region, including ones we don't own, get Itaizembe seniority, giving us minus 50% local conversion cost and 3% local missionary strength. We do, of course, also gain 100 of each PowerPoint. I love when I end a recording and forget to press the button to start a new one. Didn't miss too much. I just declared war to try and grab these provinces before those 5 years are up. They might be up already. I don't know. We'll just, hopefully they aren't. But also, the Thraxis came back, which was kind of weird because it has not been 10 years. But we asked why everyone gets sick when they look up at the sky for too long, and basically it sort of freaked out and then said, don't ask us that, which is always a good sign. Anyway, it did give us minus 10% tech cost, so that's cool. Just had to upgrade our canal for this one. Surely Lupulan, the great lizard spirit, must be a sign that the rainforest in South Hellas was once the home of lizardfolk. Perhaps the humans might not be aware of our past there, and simply don't recognize the lizardfolk ruins for what they truly are. It's time to reclaim Lupulan in the name of the lizardfolk. Said claim may be 80,000 years old, but all claims are permanent for the final empire. We get 100 of each point and Empire of Souls until the end of the game, giving us 50% additional trade range and 2 additional merchants. Now, I'm pretty sure we've run out of time to get our additional bonuses for the merfolk, which is kind of a shame. I just kind of took too long, but we will go ahead and grab this stuff over here, and then this one little island and like one colony here. We'll be back for the rest of this stuff. Actually, funny enough, I think we are exactly on time. Apparently, 4 years and 11 months ago, we fired the event. Here we go. The merfolk that believe in the theory that they might be descended from the Ruinborn are persecuted in merfolk society, so we'll give them a new place to reside. That will be over here. Not exactly sure how they're expected to get to this landlocked province, but anyway. We've talked more with the locals on Romutha, our space colony, and found that we recognize some of the writing from an ancient tablet. This gives us pretty solid evidence of the 136th Empire being real, and it's likely that its capital, which simply disappeared one day, was simply teleported to Romutha. This increases our faith in the prophecy, giving us 100 of each point, of which I have way too many. Weirdly enough, this is the one area that we don't get claims, and I don't know why, but we do have to invade them, so we might as well get started. As it turns out, the laser moths are not just controllable, but you can actually control when and where they fire their massive lasers. So for the rest of the game, we get 5% siege ability, which is funny because from the descriptions, it seems like it would be able to one-shot any fort. If a single moth is able to create a beam of light so destructive it can carve a hole deep into the mountain, I figure having like 10 of these is probably enough to annihilate any fort. But anyway, 5% siege ability, that works. Okay, a few things. One, we have our colony in Elantir, so we'll finish this off. The discovery of Elantir has been vital for connecting the pieces of our history. At some point, there were lizardfolk in Elantir, although not many, since the 118th Empire only had around 5,000 inhabitants. There was also the 73rd Empire that sailed to Elantir to defeat the dragons, only to be defeated themselves. Remember, at one point the world was ruled by dragons before the precursor elves were able to beat them back. But much like the 73rd Empire, we have come to Elantir to destroy any last draconic influence, and to discover the truth of what happened to them. We increase our faith in the prophecy. We get a new type of lizard folk in our colony, which will convert to that culture, or at least some part of it will convert. The Thraxis has also returned once again. So we're going to ask a second question. Are the gods real?
Yes.
There was a long pause as the lizard folk waited for the Thraxis to elaborate, but it appeared to believe the single word answer was sufficient. Eventually, one did ask, so that means Raka Drakt and Naga Katesh are indeed real? What about non-lizard folk faiths? The Canorian gods like Castellos, or Eliket, the god of the humans in Catarata, are they indeed fake? There was another long pause before the Thraxis spoke again. I cannot speak to any individual god. It is easy for us to lose track of who or what gets called a god. Dragons have been worshipped as gods. elves too, angels, demons, even we have been worshipped as a god before. Their stories change over time, and we struggle to keep track of truth from myth. We struggle with the evolution of stories over the passage of time, as time does not have meaning to us. What is now a god may have once been a demon, or a dragon, or a normal lizard folk, or have simply been a fanciful tale. The crowd murmured and shuffled in their seats. The murmuring grows louder as neighbors grew animated in their disagreements with each other, before finally the Thraxis spoke again. We would advise you not to worry about the reality of your gods, or any others. Believe in what you have created, for that is very real. Look upon what stories you told, what cities you built, and what art you created. Everything fades. Well, everything but us. But those stories can last and carry your legacy. At the very least, we shall remember your story. Very cool, thank you, Thraxis. We get 3% missionary strength for the next 10 years. Oh, we have a different effect actually with our butterflies. Yeah, no, they don't just give you a little bit of siege ability. Yeah, so all of our barrages are actually now butterfly barrages. Or I guess they're moth barrages. I don't know why it says butterflies, but anyway. Yeah, that does a little something, you know, just minus 50% fort defense. A slight buff to our barrage ability. I don't actually know how long that lasts for. It kind of seems permanent, and I don't think it should be permanent. But maybe once the war ends, it just goes back to normal. Finally, we have integrated Biraga. That took a really, really long time. I don't really even have the governing capacity to fit all this stuff, but I'm going to try. Ooh. Okay, so I was upgrading Kankatesh here, and it does not seem to be exactly what we expected. It started with a deep rumble. After many failed experiments to uncover the truth of the Shalazar spire, something had clearly changed with this latest attempt. The spire itself seemed to be shifting, shimmering in the sunlight as though it was struggling to remain tangible. One face of the spire began to fade out of existence, behind it revealing an ancient writing that began to warp into legible script in front of the shocked crowd. Many thanks for unknowingly lending me your sacred spire. May retrieve it from its current location in the plane of Earth, although I doubt even your kind can morph into something that can withstand its pressures. I hope you enjoyed this replica in the meantime. As the lettering faded away, the colossal spire started to twist and bend in unnatural ways. Sections of the structure faded in and out of vision, creaking and groaning as parts gave way underneath them. Finally, with an excruciatingly loud groan, the entire spire gave way. The entire structure began to topple down towards the city of Shalazar, and the people braced for the worst. But the blocks disappeared before hitting the ground, avoiding any destruction on the city. For a moment, the entire city breathed a sigh of relief, and then the true nightmare began. Where the spire once stood, a giant spinning portal swirled slowly. Strange creatures began to crawl and fly out of its maw, earth elementals, gigantic husks made of tar and coal. Although the elementals' invasion through the portal subsided within hours, it took weeks for the last of them to stop waging destruction across Odu Karas. The spire was a fake. We get a whole bunch of devastation, and it's replaced with a different monument. Instead, we have the Gate of Earth, which I think we have to upgrade actually. Yep. We'll get started on that. Having completed enough Naga agendas, we can finish this one off as well. The idea is to give more authority to the engineers and mages to study the tower, which, well, it just disappeared in front of our eyes. But it says here, surely the engineers and mages wouldn't be so foolish as to blow up the spire, right? And the reason it's written that way is actually because we weren't supposed to be able to actually do this yet. The only reason we were able to upgrade that tower is because we have a powerful mage. So if we didn't, we would have to finish this mission, then basically get permission to upgrade it. But anyway, we get 200 of each point. We'll finish off this war by taking all of this territory. Although I don't think it's going to be enough. No, we're gonna need a lot more than that. The Thraxis returns once again, and we can ask another question. What are humans, and why have they spread so much? Which ones are the humans again? Are they the ones with no scales and are about half your size? There was a long back and forth between the Lizardfolk and the Thraxis as they explained the difference between halflings, humans, elves, ruin-born, dwarves, and various other scaleless races. It was quickly clear that they were not going to get a satisfactory answer on why humanity were taking over the planet. But before the sun could rise over a disappointed crowd, robbed of their chance to question the Thraxis, it dropped one final nugget of wisdom. We have seen many different races rise and fall on this planet. elves, giants, lizardfolk, dragons, Aether, I don't even know what that is, genies, celestials, so many others we do not remember the exact names of. It can be difficult for us to keep up. We did not realize the elves were considered to have fallen, although even we recognized the significance of the ruin when it occurred. Humans are relatively new, even newer than the lizardfolk. We are sure that their fall shall occur, as it does with all peoples of the planet. The lizardfolk, however, will never fall again. We get 10 years of minus 25% unjustified demands, which would have been really useful in this war considering just how much I took without having a claim on it, but whatever. So I'm a little bit dumb. As it turns out, before invading Horashesh, you're actually supposed to invade the Genie Coast because that gives you a claim on the entire Horashesh region. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that real quick. The Thraxus is back, and let's ask it what a Chokin is. A most delightful creature, said the Thraxus, followed by a terrifying cacophony of voices that the crowd slowly realized was laughter. We did wonder when it was that you would ask about it. It can be difficult for us to tell one lizardfolk from another across times, but we always know when we are speaking to a new person when you ask about a Chokin. For every lizardfolk eventually inquires about their kind. The Thraxus continued speaking much more animatedly than usual, with none of their usual long pauses. The Chokin have been here as long as you have. They have thrived as you have, suffered when you have, risen and fallen as your people have. We do not understand why so many speak of them with disdain, or why they do not feature more prominently on your emblems. While we are quite humbled that you have placed our form on your flag, we would have thought no creature had a greater bond with your kind than the Chokin. Perhaps it is so part of your society that you consider it part of this great empire you built as much as any other lizardfolk. We hope that is how you see it, for to care for the Chokin is to care for yourselves. Number one Chokin fan over here, let's go. 10 years of 15% production efficiency. We only actually need a fraction of this, but we might as well take everything we can, especially most of these trade centers. We do of course also require provinces in Daunako. However, like half of those on the coastline are owned by various countries in the Empire of Anbennar. Very cool. Some of these countries are just a little bit too protected for me to really do much with. It's not that I fear their navies, it's more so I fear they're gonna find some stupid way to just walk here. And if they do, that's a lot of troops that I can't really deal with. So while it's not my favorite, I'm just gonna have to threaten war a couple times. Welcome back, Thraxus. What happened to the Shadow Swamp Lizardfolk? I'll spare you the dialogue for this one. Basically, the Swamp Lizardfolk had their city and spire sink into the swamp, and up to this point, we had no idea that this spire even existed. All we have to go off of is that it was a little bit west of the World Tree. We do get 10 years of harsh treatment cost reduction, and of course, we know where it is. It's right here, kind of just on the map. But oddly enough, we actually can't interact with it yet. We have some interesting age bonuses here. Rapid expansion for minus 10% core creation cost, and then also unification of splintered lands to get early access to the Imperialism CB. Now, I do really like the Imperialism CB, but I think I like admin efficiency a little bit better. Now, we do need to take a few more provinces in South Elantir. So we're going to go to war with Buzelar to make that happen. And fortunately, at the same time, Buzelar has a few things that I would like to take anyway. Okay. The 12th Empire was ruled by a creature simply known as the Void. There is ample documentation of this empire, but little else is known about it, as all texts on its existence quickly descend into simply repeating the Void. Nobody questions the legitimacy of the 12th Empire. Most are simply terrified of it. The Void. Okay. We can't stop at just one war, we do have to continue taking some territory from Vurabendica. The Thraxus returns once more, and we have but one question left to ask. Were there really 333 empires? What is an empire, dear? Asked the Thraxus. The head speaker started to answer, but their voice quickly faded as arguments amongst the crowds drowned them out. Of course, the question that had plagued Catalashia's legitimacy since its inception would inevitably start arguments before even the Thraxus had a chance to speak. Eventually, the Emperor, who always attended Thraxus hearings but usually took a back seat during questions, stood up and shouted over the crowd. Quiet. If you truly wish to learn the truth, you will let that which has lived longer than every subject of our empire speak, for they offer wisdom far greater than any of your minds combined could muster. The shouting stopped, although the low murmur continued as the Emperor turned and addressed the Thraxus once again. In your own time, please do answer. As you have observed, this question has troubled our people for some time. What counts as an empire is not clear to us, said the Thraxis after its customary long pause. We do not see the difference between one Lizardfolk empire and the next. To us, you are Lizardfolk. As we are a million voices speaking as one, the Lizardfolk to us are a united body moving together. To us, you are still the first empire. For Lizardfolk have never ceased to be, as so many others on this world have done so. We're still the first empire. That makes sense, as the Thraxis isn't really that invested in the particular details of each Lizardfolk government and what they were doing at any specific time. So this does give us 10% core creation cost reduction for the next 10 years, and I guess that's everything we're allowed to ask the Thraxis. We do have our next idea group, and I'm leaning towards infrastructure. Consistently governing capacity has been one of our main issues. Oh yeah, I did put on Great Conquerors, just didn't expect one to be on my border. I do need Gomuvuri's territory, then we'll just take the whole coastline plus a little bit extra. Oh boy, I sure do love fighting colonial wars. Well, Buzalor, I'm gonna take all of your colonial possessions. Okay, well maybe not the stuff up here, because I don't care. Now, the Irican Spire and the surrounding area are back under our control. Unfortunately, the top of the spire broke off some time between the 51st and 102nd Empires, which means it can never be restored to its original purpose. Lizardfolk culture will spread in the Zuvaziva area. We'll also get a little bit of development, a large Lizardfolk minority in every owned province in Horashesh, and 100 of each power point. At this point, I'm just waiting for a couple of things to happen. So, we'll declare war on the Daran Trading Company with Imperialism. Hopefully, we'll just fully annex them. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, we did pick up this age abilities, that's why we have Imperialism. We have another rather silly empire. During the Green Blight, if you were a Lizardfolk hero, you could slay a dragon and proclaim yourself the new emperor of a new empire, and that is what supposedly happened in the 324th Empire, except that the emperor, in quotes, actually hadn't slain a dragon, instead fabricating the head of one, and after being deposed, the dragon he had supposedly killed returned and wiped out the entire town. So does that really count as an empire? Well, not really. But for the purposes of the prophecy, of course it has to. We will lose faith in the prophecy though. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention also our last heir died. I've also been getting like 17 different events to actually get a mage, but I went ahead and decided to just do the magical rite of conception with the mages. So tragically, the mother has died, but we now have our 443 powerful mage. For our last reform, naturally, we'll be taking political absolutism. That brings our max absolutism to 100 and our admin efficiency to 51%. I hope you brought a snack because the next 10 minutes are going to be nothing but lore dumping. So in this province, you'll notice we have not just the spire, which is suspiciously not very tall, but also an entire fortress around it. That fortress is known as an Ananoma. It's like an ancient halfling citadel, and there are a few of these along the coast, like one in here, one in here, one in here as well. We started exploring the citadel and the spire as they descend much further beneath the surface, about, 5 or 6 times the depth of the spire itself above ground. So we're finding a bunch of ancient relics until eventually, when we reach the bottom, we start to find precursor relics. Multiple floors right down to the very final floor of the entire spire were lined with research equipment and magical contraptions from the ages of the precursor elves. Next to all the precursor relics were similar relics from an ancient Lizardfolk civilization. It appears the two had been working together on something in this structure. This prompts more questions. Why were the precursors in Sarhal? Why were they working side by side with the Lizardfolk? Were they too trying to uncover the mysteries of this ancient spire? We have even more questions than before. The province now produces precursor relics and we get plus 10 artificer capacity for the rest of the game. We've also completed a few missions, starting with this one over here. If you remember, this spire being a fake and the actual one seemingly being stolen from its location, the prevailing theory is that that was the work of some genies. Of course, the genies have not roamed Sarhal since the Day of Ashen Skies, but the existence of that portal immediately following the disappearance of the illusory spire suggests that it leads to another dimension. We assume that somewhere through the portal, the true spire still stands, if it is indeed stolen by genies. So we're going to send these 20,000 infantry in to check it out. The plane of Earth has no sky. The most comparable location would be the tunnels under the Serpent Spine, but nothing could quite compare to the sheer strangeness our expeditionaries discovered there. The Earth itself appeared to glow, giving the whole land a dim red light that illuminated proceedings. Rivers of mud flowed in upward waterfalls, while formations of pure diamond, kilometers across, hovered in midair. The inhabitants were not typically hostile, although neither were they typically friendly. Mining expeditions tended to give any Earth elementals wandering the plane a wide berth. If one had made its home next to a rich vein of coal, we had little option but to mark it on a map for future exploration and move on. Thankfully, genie palaces were hard to miss. Their resplendent glory contrasted supremely with the ugly rock and earth that surrounded them. Hewn from ore and bright gemstones, each one stood out amongst the landscape and were used as markers in maps for explorers already. The first expeditions had simply planned to mark every genie palace on the map as a place to explore later, but as luck would have it, we did not need to explore that far. Standing atop one genie palace, gleaming with greater beauty than even the palace itself, stood what we were looking for, a Zatsaria. It was pristine, a single complete piece with stars sparkling across its face. The path was drawn, the expedition returned, and our next expedition of 20,000 troops returned to reclaim our spire. It was a disaster. "Look at these flies," roared the lead genie, flicking her hand and wiping away every single weapon in our arsenal. "I think they want their spire back." How cute. "These are the creatures you were once afraid of?" Another genie gestured their hand vaguely in the direction of the army, sending a cascading river of mud to wipe away the forces. "I told you, they once had wish catchers. It was different. Nobody heard the rest of the conversation. Only 12 lizard folk returned." Okay, yeah, alright. Who's stability, and we unlock some new questions for the Thraxis. That definitely could have gone better, but at the very least we do get coal in this province. That's from upgrading it to level 3. Anyway, lizard folk had lived in the Shadow Swamp as recently as about 1500 years ago, and today, all across the Shadow Swamp, the Ajdara lizard folk culture has been reborn. Inspired pieces of art, incredible architectural construction, and some of the greatest modern minds are now born and made in the Shadow Swamp. More than anything though, the sense of Arach, meaning home, has returned to the lizard folk of the swamp. Azdara, once again, feels like home. For the next 50 years, the entire Shadow Swamp gets minus 10% local development cost, and we increase our faith in the prophecy. The secret ingredient to that resettlement of the Shadow Swamp was the humble and stupid Chokin. The Chokin, entirely oblivious to anything going on around it, has managed to thrive in the Shadow Swamp where other crops and animals failed to. Indeed, the entire 333rd Empire runs on Chokin. If the front of our flag proudly shows the Thraxis, then its back surely contains the bulbous eyes and stubby legs of the Chokin. In 4 to 6 years, we will get another event, and for the rest of the game, the Shadow Swamp region gets minus 25% local construction cost and minus 25% local development cost. As the lizard folk spread beyond Thanaeus, more mutations have begun to pop up, some more extreme than others, and many not quite accepted as, quote, true lizard folk. We cannot allow this narrow view of what a lizard folk is to take hold. If we are the empire of all lizard folk, that means discrimination must be prevented. We no longer lose estate loyalty whenever we remove mutations, and we also get 100 of each power point. The Thraxis has returned once again, and this time we do have a question for it. What is this wish catcher the genie spoke of? What a curious name. Is it perhaps some kind of charm or token to hang by one's sleeping quarters? The speaker slowly and calmly explained everything they had heard about the wish catcher. What the genies said, the message left by the fake spire in Shalazar, the various logs they had found written by the precursor elves. None of them seemed to be ringing any bells with the Thraxis. That is, until one person in the crowd mentioned that one of the precursor messages spoke of frills, which caused the Thraxis to whir back to life, its million voices calling out with renewed vigor. Oh, that curious lizard. Yes, we do remember that being. A wish catcher, you call it. What a wonderfully evocative name. It did more than catch a wish, though. It ate wish magic. By spreading its magnificent frilled mane, it drew in the very essence of a genie's magic and devoured it whole. We believe there were more types of magic it could eat. It could, perhaps, even eat us. but it was far too polite to do such a thing. Of course, those elves would be frightened of it, and definitely the genies. Their existence is one of wish magic. We do not know what would be left of them if you ate its wish. Perhaps its shoes would remain. The Thraxis spun quicker and laughed at its own joke, the million voices laughing at different tones and paces, creating a din akin to being buried alive with 1,000 beehives. But even its laugh could not drown out the excited chatter amongst the crowd. Something so strong, even beings with power beyond our comprehension feared it. We get 10 innovativeness. So this spire is allegedly cursed. Anyone who's entered it has either died in under 12 seconds or mutated into a horrific monster, which on one occasion actually brought down the 34th Empire. However, recently, a Chokin accidentally wandered in when the guards weren't paying attention, and half an hour later, it simply walked out. Not just one Chokin though, a full family of them, who seemed to be living in the spire completely unaffected. So now we have to figure out why those Chokins survive when no one else is able to, which means we can now use the Great Project. This war didn't exactly turn out the way that I wanted, but at the very least I can pick up all of the islands in our general vicinity, plus all the stuff over here. I'll even pick that up, and then 2 provinces, actually 3 so we can make a subject over here, and then 1 province for me to station a navy because fighting colonial powers is incredibly tedious. This mission was practically done a while ago, just had to change the national focus to diplomatic, and this one is actually kind of important. Dragons left Elantir long ago. Any attempts by the Drakthaya Lizardfolk to find them has turned up nothing. But interest in draconic revenge has long faded in significance beside the possibility of learning what happened between our ancestors and the precursors. An expedition has discovered a building in Elantir that bears an eerie resemblance to the Zatsaria in our homeland. A great spire with the inner workings similar to that of the spire in Zerat. It appears that this one has been intentionally sabotaged, so our attempts to turn it back on have proved ineffective. But bigger mysteries lie in some core design elements. This was not built by the Lizardfolk. This was built by the elves. Did Lizardfolk build this for the precursor elves? What happened then that meant Lizardfolk society collapsed while Elven society continued until the day of Ashen Skies? In amongst the old precursor records, we may have found the answer, or more accurately, where we can find our answer. The records speak of a joint construction project between Lizardfolk and elves somewhere in the Ocean of the Lost. On an island somewhere stands a symbol of Lizardfolk and elves working together to build something incredible. We must find it. And we in fact have found it. It's right on this island over here. But anyway, we get a claim on the Torn Isles and Sarenbor. We'll also find the Pillar of the Heavens in a random owned province somewhere in South Elantir. Okay, that's not very random, it literally just spawned in the capital over here. But anyway, here's the Pillar of Heavens, a portal nexus that connected our planet to others within the solar system. All part of an interplanetary precursor empire. Interesting. Also, weird aside, I just don't like it when you call other planet systems solar systems, because like the solar system usually refers to just, you know, the one with soul in it, which is what we call our sun. But anyway, I'm just kind of doing side quests at this point. Don't really need most of this stuff, but I'll take it anyway. Now this is territory that I actually do need. Oh, here's a fun one. The only records we have of the 9th Empire is that it was devoured by cannibals. And why is that the only information we have? Well, as it turns out, the 9th Empire may not have existed. It might have literally just been a 789 joke. So we lose faith in the prophecy. That's not a problem, I was saving this for exactly when this would happen. We notice that the new mutations amongst the Irakin Lizardfolk bear some resemblance to some of the old mutations that were spoken of in previous empires. So that brings up a new question: is it possible to recreate those old mutations with the right conditions? We get the Dasharik mutation for the Ankashi, those being our nobles, of course, giving us 15% trade efficiency minus 25% culture conversion cost, but 10% increased trade company investment cost. Of course, we increase the faith in the prophecy once more, and Gamyi becomes a new mutation homeland. I care very little for these guys over here. I'll just go ahead and get them out of the war. Not before crushing an army, of course. I'm pretty sure this should be enough provinces. There we go. The genies were responsible for the downfall of many Lizardfolk empires. Yet, despite this, there was once a time where the genies feared the Lizardfolk. The 271st Empire even called the Genie Coast their home. until at one point the city surrounding this Zatsaria sank into the ground. So as we restore the city itself, we will also restore the Shiashkai Lizardfolk culture. We get 100 of each power point. We get a new culture in New Hookfield, this province here. 8 provinces within Dalnako and Favanosi will also become Shiashkai Lizardfolk, and the city itself gains 50 local development cost reduction. We do also get a claim in Horashesh, that's the region we've been conquering for quite some time, and supposedly we get another 100 of each point, so I'm just going to spend a little bit. The city was of course already developed, but I threw a little bit extra in there. Few empires loom as large in our history as the 271st, but that interest has dramatically increased with all the incredible discoveries we have made lately. At the bottom of Kazakesh lay an absolute treasure trove of information about this empire. They were working together with the precursor elves to uncover the mysteries of the Zatsaria. What happened? How did their relationship sour? Did they successfully activate the spire? Did the elves not wish to share the secrets of Romutha, the lands beyond the spires? As tragic as their collapse may be, this rise in awareness of everything the 271st Empire accomplished has created a revival of their culture. It is little more than roleplay, but Lizardfolk have even started moving to Dalnako, dressing in gold and calling themselves Shiashkai Lizardfolk, in honor of the 271st Empire. The golden scales have returned to Kazakesh. We increase our faith in the prophecy, get a whole bunch of points, and unlock the ability to repair the spire in New Hookfield. Although, funny enough, I've already been upgrading the spire, actually, so I'm not entirely sure what the idea behind that was. Ah, I see. We have a special button here, okay. So, let's go ahead and bump that up another time. It actually makes me wonder, how many of these have I messed up? Okay, it looks like none of them actually, so that's good. Oh right, even the event is called a second activation. Although we had activated one spire, that didn't mean those who were entering Kazakesh were any less nervous. There were practical questions, whether the spire on the other side would be deep underground as Kazakesh was, whether we should transport all people, equipment, and resources to the very bottom of the spire and assume it will be at ground level, or instead stay towards the top of the spire and assume that is where we would step out. Would we return to a different spot on Romutha or somewhere else entirely? A clattering of gears, stars lighting up the entire deep trench the spire was buried in until a blinding light and then red. This was certainly not Romutha. The spire stood in a vast, dusty, open plain, with nary a single living thing in sight. The main doors opened onto mere dirt, while those at the top peered through the semi-transparent walls, trying to make out anything across the barren landscape. In a brief parting of the copious dust clouds, one could just about make out what seemed to be a village. A small scouting crew set out on the roughly hour walk to the village, only to find it was just ruins. A larger crew returned with shovels to dig up the remains, but they were so old it was difficult to draw any conclusions. That is, until one uncovered a skeleton. Its bones were different to anything you would find on Halan, save 2 specific creatures. The first was a chokin, and this creature stood on 2 legs, so evidently was not a chokin. The other animal with bones like this? Lizardfolk. They were here too. Okay, we can now build our colony in this area. I'll also go ahead and take all of this. Alrighty, off you go. We also have a few extra tags to just get rid of real quick. We also cannot allow this evil to persist on our border. Just ignore the fact that they're also guaranteeing a country I want to invade. Definitely doing this for very wholesome and morally good reasons. This might be the first time I've ever fought a lich in any of my videos. So the special thing about these guys, I mean obviously he's just not going to die, firstly. But secondly, they tend to use undead armies, and the fun thing about undead armies is that they give you pretty much infinite manpower. So these guys get 5.2 thousand manpower. You can see that they are a great conqueror, giving them 66% increased manpower recovery speed. Army of the Dead also gives them 150% increased maximum manpower, and then they're currently slackening for even more. Fortunately, without having to slacken, I still make more manpower, so it's not a big deal. The other special thing is that they take pretty much no morale damage because it's an army of zombies, so whenever you have to fight them, you pretty much just have to delete all of their troops. They don't shatter the same way other armies do. See, for example, they do take a lot of casualties, but the morale barely budges. Back on the interplanetary frontier, we sent an envoy to what we assumed would be a Lizardfolk town, preparing ourselves much better this time than on Romutha. However, who we found were not Lizardfolk. Instead, we found what seemed to be a descendant population of the precursor elves. The first meeting was terrible. They threw spears at us and tried to send us away. And even the second meeting, where we managed to speak to the village elder, also went poorly. They seemed convinced we were about to send a mythical monster known as the Wishcatcher, and knew nothing of any living Lizardfolk in these lands. We'll have to see what happens in another 2 years. We've taken the capital of Warageta, and since they're ruled by a lich, they have a phylactery, which is essentially where they hold their soul, such that they can remain immortal. So as long as we can hold on to the capital, we should be able to find and destroy it. And there it is. The lich's phylactery is destroyed, we get 20 prestige, and +1 diplo rep and -10% aggressive expansion for the next 10 years. They do still have the Army of the Dead. I think I'm just going to go ahead and probably end the war though. We will remove the evil ruler, even though he's already gone. I just figure you have to do this anyway. Setting up a colony was difficult, what with the near constant drought and unfriendly locals. Navigating the dust storms was also quite difficult until we realized that the stars were roughly the same as they were back in Teneos. Notably, the planet of Agradant was missing, and instead a new blue star could be spotted in the sky. We eventually realized that that blue star was in fact Alan, and we were on Agradant. Looks like the Agradant colony has been established. About half a day's travel from the Zatsaria, next to a bountiful oasis, the Agradant colony was thriving. Guards accompanied caravans to and from the spire, as on more than one occasion the elves had attacked them mid-journey. Once you learned the terrain, finding watering holes for Chokin ranchers was relatively easy, and there were native fruits that were edible. Life was harsh on Agradant, and the dust was torture on the lungs, but there was a freedom living this far away from the homeland. The Lizardfolk skeleton found amongst the ruins on the opening expedition was the only sign of Lizardfolk found anywhere on the planet. It appears whenever they lived on this planet, they had long since died out. Precursor ruins, on the other hand, were plentiful and bountiful. Track out into the dusty, barren landscape and one could uncover incredible treasures in abandoned towns and even cities filled with relics from the age of elves. They were clearly the same elves from Halan, although when their connection with our homeworld was severed remains unclear. The most valuable materials found, though, were the remains of mines and manufactories. While they had long since stopped operating, we were able to figure out they were constructing parts for new space pillars. Parts clearly based on what was found in Zatsaria. Perhaps Agradant could be more than a colony. It could be the key we've needed to repair more Zatsaria. So we have our new colony. It will, of course, gain the one province where it started. The entire Daonako region gets a local trade power increase plus 20%, 40 local settler increase, and 0.25 monthly autonomy reduction for the rest of the game. We do also get that +1 tolerance of the true faith for the rest of the game. And I think that's actually where I'd like to end things off for today. The tree is quite a bit longer than I had imagined. I don't know why I expected this tree to be done by around like 1600. Clearly that's not the case. If at least for no other reason than the fact that the agendas take a long time to get through, especially when they give you ones like these where you need to humiliate the command. But in any case, that'll be the pin where we end off our third part today. We're doing quite well. We do of course make around 1.5 thousand ducats, or crowns, excuse me, every month. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Of course, I will continue this with a fourth part, but if you'd like to go ahead and leave a like on the video anyways, I would super appreciate it. And I suspect it's not your first time here, so if you're not subscribed by this point, then I think that would be a great idea to make sure you don't miss the last part of Catalashia. In that case, it might also help to turn on the notifications. But for now, this is Corbett, signing off, and as always, have a fantastic day. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of the patrons for this month. Everyone who donates gets early access to videos for as low as $1 a month, so I'd like to give a special thank you to those who decide to donate more than that. So thank you Erica, Baby Cal, Born to Dunk, Gallo4, Lickebecker, Mikhail Sample, Nick Steffel, Princess Rhea, Q-Brute, AG Forero, Ben Mottram, Quiet Guy, Rosset, Torvalv, Ambient Cyan, Elysia Tatz, James Levy, Luke78776, Stalin DLRP, and Robert.